Okay, some of these questions, I'm just going to, I'm nervous about some of them. So okay. Okay, here's a good question. Again, anonymous number. Okay, here's the question. It says, as God created humans to worship and glorify him, when we get to heaven, we will fall to our knees and worship him without end. Why does God need us to worship and glorify him? We were created to tell him how great he is. Were we created to tell him how great he is? This is a great question. Maybe you've asked this before. It centers around this idea. Okay, is God so... Let me put this in like kind of a negative spin. When you think about it this way, you're like, why does God need us to worship him? Why in the world would he need our praise and our worship? Is he selfish for praise? Is he somehow angered when we are not praising him? And I think this is a really good question. There's a lot of ways that we could talk about this, but the thing I would say is that two things. One is why we're created, why we're to worship God, not only now but eternally. So God in and of himself is the greatest being in the world. He is the supreme being. He is the transcendent being. He is the creator being. And so when we, as his creation, worship anything other than him, we have misplaced worship. The reason that God is deserving of our worship for eternity without end is because it would be inappropriate for us to worship anything else, because nothing is as valuable as he is. That's idolatry, when we worship anything other than God. The most valuable thing in the world is to be worshiped. Let me put that on like a human level. So taking out the language of worship, but the person that you are supposed to show the most affection, the most love, and the most attention to in your life is your spouse. For those of you that will get married one day, that is also the case. It is to be your spouse, because the uniqueness of that union. And if you misplace your love and affection and attention to somebody else, that's inappropriate, because there's a unique relationship. They should be the most valuable human for you to show that type of love and attention and affection to. Supreme, the best that you have, your whole self. That's why the Bible says that when you are married, you become one flesh. You're together uniquely. And so in the same way with God, who is the supreme being, we are to give him all of ourselves. That's why that the Shema, which is in Deuteronomy, says it's the kind of the language of God's people, of how we're to worship him. It says we worship God with all of our heart, with all of our soul, with all of our mind, and with all of what? Our strength. Everything that we have is meant to worship him, because he's the supreme being. Now here's the uniqueness about God. And a lot of these things, when we ask questions about God and his nature, there's mystery. Now, why did God create us to eternally worship him? I'm not God, so I don't have the answer to that question, okay? But I will tell you this. It's not only because we're meant to worship him as a supreme being, but it's also for our joy. See, God has created us to enjoy him forever, to be in relationship with him in a unique way that is so profound that it is greater than anything that we taste in this life that is pleasurable or joyful. And so our worship of God without end, eternally, is not only for the praise of God as the supreme being, and so therefore it's appropriate worship, but it's also for our joy. There's nothing in the world that could bring us more joy than to worship the very God who created us. And so God is essentially creating an eternity that is for our benefit, because we are worshiping him, which brings the greatest amount of joy, more so than anything else we could put our time and attention and heart and strength to. And so I hope that helps a little bit.